understood as a very specialized sense, which is coupled with the claim that all successive violence is temporary and necessarily brings with these ills, is incredibly ahistorical. And I think that, how would you respond to someone who says, no, the actual position to have is both nonviolence and violence needs to be understood in their precise historical context. And in many cases, violence brings great goods, but also in many cases it brings bad goods, or great harms. But also, in plenty of cases, nonviolence brings, again, great goods, but also in many places it brings great harm. And that the way to actually determine this is not to have some teleological view of history, but to concretely analyze the actual history of actions taken by actors in specific times and see exactly what is or what they caused and how they actually worked out.
Okay. Well, I think that if you don't have a teleological view of history, then it would be very hard to be a pacifist. I think that if your analysis in life is, as you've described it, material, empirical in the most, sort of narrow sense, and you simply count up deficits and costs and values added, and who's left standing and who do you get to bury, and what are the material conditions after this event happened, and so on. If that's the kind of analysis you make, and it's entirely absent of transcendent convictions or convictions about a non-empirical reality and so on, then I think people who see themselves as pacifists and pacifists on this basis alone, let's call it the material basis alone, I think have made it very hard for themselves. And I was trying to say that earlier in a shorter fashion. But I mean, it's just clear, and I also tried to make this. I thought I had pretty much said this, but I mean, quite obviously, any number of occasions of violence have brought about goods. That's just a fact. There's no reason to deny that. No thinking individual could deny that. Sometimes we're better off that some people are dead. And that's just the way it is. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But of course, I've got to remember some people think they'd be better off if I were dead. And maybe they have a point to make too. And so I think it's a dangerous world in which we realize, well, things would be better if these, certain others were dead, because we all can make pretty strong arguments for who we should kill. And I don't know who would be left standing. So I'm not denying, and I thought I said clearly that violence sometimes brings about very obvious, very clear goods. I didn't mean to communicate that never happens. And I also think that nonviolence of a certain kind, some kinds of nonviolence, bring about is unjustified, it's unwarranted, it's not to be condoned, and it's dangerous and destructive. Gandhi said, for example, better to be a soldier and shoot at people than be a coward. And I agree with him in that respect. So I actually agree with you quite deeply. And so I think without a transcendent teleological view, it makes pacifism, in my view, hard to adhere to. Josh?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to clear up, maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but the view that the grain of history is towards nonviolence. I mean, is that an empirical claim? Because it seems like the 20th century was the bloodiest century that's ever occurred. Do you need something different than we're becoming more violent, less violent as a society? what did you mean by that exactly?
Okay, well, I quoted Yoder, who said the grain of the universe is, we're going against the grain of the universe when we act nonviolently, because he in fact has a transcendent, metaphysical, religious, teleological view.
Going against the grain of the universe when we act violently.
Pardon me?
Going against the grain of the universe when we act violently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. I didn't say that. So, I think in material, empirical terms about history, this is happening, right? I think in some respects, human beings are at least as violent as they've ever been, and perhaps more violent in some ways. But then I think we're probably better about some things too, perhaps. And I don't think you can judge the moment of history we're in very accurately. And so we just don't know. We just don't know. None of us know. And of course none of us know, that's a truism. Let me say it more carefully. None of us have very decent predictive powers about what the world's going to be like, say 100 years from now, in this respect. I mean, there's certain things we can predict pretty accurately, but not this. To say 100 years from now, human beings are going to be more peaceable or less peaceable, we don't know. Now, I do a field of studies, peace studies, in which a lot of social scientists, a lot of people who keep data and quantify that data and use it in comparative fashion, looking at different kinds of violence over the decades, and they look at patterns and so on. A lot of those people, if they were sitting here, I'm talking about sociologists and political scientists and so on of a certain skill set, they would say we are actually becoming less violent. And there's a lot of data you could muster for that argument. I'm aware of that data, and I know the argument. I'm just not making it to you because I'm quite willing to say, and I'm not sure that's true. I don't think we can judge the people in any moment of history are not the people to judge that moment of history. And I think there are very promising indicators about certain aspects of our behavior, but there are very troubling indicators too. And I think it's all fragile. I think every good thing we're doing is fragile, and it could implode easily. But on the same time, history is sort of a burst of surprises, and things happen when we least expect it to happen for the good as well. So I don't know. Yes?
So, would you include self-defense? Because it seems to me like nobody wants to be violent, you know what I mean? Just not because it's even for a moral reason, just because it's, you could get hurt, you know what I mean? And that sucks. So it seems to me like the reality is, if you look at any history, like whenever there's been any real social change, it's always been people that have been forced, generally from self-defense, to fight back. Even the offense is a form of defense. And I wanted to point out, like, for example, when the North was fighting the South in the Civil War, that was the bloodiest war. I think if you do it on the basis of how many people actually were in the United States or in the world at the time, in history at the time, and so I just wanted to say, it seems to me like the reality is that we create these cancers, or maybe like with increasing production, we are able to generate the kind of surpluses and the things that we have that enable like new social systems to arise, but also new cancers to arise, and somehow you have to have like enough radiation or something to go and kill the cancer, So I don't know, it just seems to me like there's no way to really avoid it. It's kind of like a self-defense mechanism. If my boss, I don't know, like we have a strike and the National Guard is sent out, like what are you going to do? Like you could just give in, make you have to give in, but if you're able to stop it, even if it means the way it did in the 30s, like, what are you going to do about it, you know?
Okay, well, you've made out of the many things you said, I'm going to take three. You made three claims I want to address, okay? One is that you implied that a person has a moral, it's morally legitimate to defend yourself if you need to do so violently. Well, if that's true, I don't see why it's not true, equally true, that I have a moral, if it's morally justified for me to defend myself, then I think I have the same moral right